find these slides on GitHub here. So all you have to do is go to this GitHub repository link, and if you scroll down, then you'll see one of the sections is dedicated to this series. So it'll say Intro to Data Structures with Python. And then if you click on that, then you'll see today's materials. Today we only have slides for our presentation. We don't have any extensive coding necessarily. So we'll just be going through one simple example for today. But those slides will be, you can simply download those from GitHub. They're a PDF file. And please make sure that your chat is set to all panelists and attendees. The default is sort of set to panelists, so just make sure to change that. And then just some basic housekeeping rules. So because this is a webinar, everyone is sort of muted by default, but we'll definitely ask for participation at different times for today's session and for future sessions. Feel free to share your thoughts in the chat, and please use the Q&A function to ask your questions there. It's just easier to sort of answer those questions and make sure they're addressed if they're directly in the Q&A section as opposed to the chat. And we have a full team here today. Everyone who is a panelist, we're all part of the Women Who Code Python team. So please reach out to us if you have any technical questions. But yeah, so I think with that, we can get started. So welcome everyone. So welcome to Women Who Code. And this is for the Women Who Code Python track, the Intro to Data Structures with Python ASA technical interview series. And today's session is an introduction. So we're going to be talking about kind of the format of the series, going over some more high level concepts, nothing extremely technical, but then for future sessions, we'll be having, quite a bit more of live coding and things like that. So today, Jasmeen and I are sort of the co-leads of this series. So I'm Rishika Singh. I am the track lead for Women Who Code Python. I've been part of Women Who Code Python. I think I joined about April or May of last year. I'm kind of forgetting the last year's been kind of a blur with time, but it's been a wonderful experience being part of this community. And I'm so excited to kick off this series. And thanks everyone for joining.
Hey everyone, my name is Jasmeen and I'm an evangelist for Women Who Code. I've been with the team for the past 8 months, I guess. Yeah, like Rishika said, it's been a blur last year. But yeah, before we get into the content, let's give them some information about Women Who Code. So our mission is to inspire women to excel in technology careers. And our vision is a world where women are representatives as technical executives, founders, VC board members, and software engineers. Our target is engineers with 2 or more years of experience looking for support and resources to strengthen their influence and level up in their careers. And we do have a code of conduct, which can be found along with the incident report at this link right here. We do take this very seriously because Women Who Code is an inclusive community, and all our events, including this one, are intended to inspire women who would like to excel in their own careers. And we do not tolerate any sort of harassment. Some stats on Women Who Code: we have around 230,000 members. We have 70 networks in 20 countries, members in 97 plus countries, and more than 10,000 events. Our daily conference tickets is priced a little over $1,000. Our scholarships are valued at $2 million. And we also provide access to jobs and resources and infinite connections. Lastly, our movement is, as the world changes, we can be connecting force that creates a sense of belonging while the world is being asked to isolate. With that, I'll pass it over to Rishika to talk about our upcoming events, today's agendas, and the series information.
All right, thanks, Jasmeen. So here are some of our upcoming events for our Python track. So we have another ongoing series right now, Database with Python. So a session on Firebase is coming up on March 10th, and then the next session after that for that series will be March 31st. And then this series is bi-weekly. So basically every other week, same time, same day, we'll be having this series. So we have our session 2 and session 3 planned for March already. Once you register for one of, as you're registered for this one, you're registered for all of them. It's the same Zoom link, so it kind of makes it easy on your end. There's only one Zoom link that you have to join every single time. And please stay connected with us. So we're all on social media. So we have an Instagram, a Twitter, and a LinkedIn at Women Who Code Python, www.codepython, as well as our website. This is where you can find more details about our track if you want to volunteer with the track. And you can also find the upcoming events that I just showed you. So today's agenda, there's a few different things we want to go over. First is some information about the series, kind of a breakdown of the different topics, kind of the format to expect for every session. Then we're going to be going into the coding challenge. Since this series is about kind of applying knowledge of data structures with Python to actually technical interviews, and sort of giving you the resources to ace your next technical interview. We're going to be talking about what is the coding challenge and why do companies use it, and sort of the three general types of the coding challenge. Then we'll be providing sort of a few different steps of how to actually approach a coding challenge when you're presented one in an interview, and then some do's and don'ts for technical interviews in a more general sense. And then we'll be showing you some simple interview questions from easy, medium, and hard level. For the medium and hard, we're just going to show you the problem statement, but we're not actually going to work through them quite yet. Hopefully, as we go through this series, you will have the knowledge to actually go through these medium and hard ones and solve it on your own. For the easy level, we will be walking through the solutions for this. It won't be extremely extensive, but I will do some live coding with this and show you the solution for the easy level interview question. And then we'll also provide some resources and preparation that you can sort of take home with you, including LeetCode, HackerRank, and REPL. Yeah, so the first section is series information. So the format of the series, as I mentioned, is going to be bi-weekly, so every other week. And we're going to kind of combine both the concepts and theory of the data structures and also applications. So essentially coding these data structures in Python. So generally the first half is going to be a slide presentation like this. And then the second half we'll be using a Colab notebook. We've used this for previous series, including our beginner Python series. So it's going to be just like that. We'll provide a link to the notebook so you can code along with us as we're sort of doing a live coding session together. And then there's also going to be an opportunity for live Q&A. So today we will pause for any questions that might come up. But for all future sessions, we'll have time to answer any questions as we get more advanced in these concepts. We can directly address these questions. And also about midway through our series, we do have a Q&A and review session. So that'll kind of give you a chance to pre-submit any questions that you might have and make sure that any doubts that you have, those are fully cleared up. And then we also want to make sure to incorporate one real life technical interview question per data structure. For today, we're not presenting any data structures, but for every session, we typically have 1 to 2 data structures that we're focusing on. So for each of those, we want to have one sort of applied technical interview question so you can actually see how it can be used in practice. And then here are the list of the different topics. So this is kind of separate. Today's is just an introduction session. So the next session will start module 1. And these are the built-in and Python specific data structures. So we went over these in our beginner Python series. So if you went through that, you might already have this knowledge, but we're just sort of going through all of these to sort of make sure you're all on the same page and have that same foundation. So we'll be going over lists, dictionaries, tuples, and sets. And then from there, we'll get into module number 2, which is going to be linear data structures. And these are going to be user defined so that they're not built-in data structures built into Python. So we're going to have one session on arrays and matrices, and then stacks and queues. And then linked lists will be on its own because it's slightly more complicated. It's a lot of different operations with linked lists. Then we'll end off with module number 3, which is also user defined, but now non-linear structures. So now we're going to have trees, heaps, graphs, and then maps and hash tables. And then in the middle right here, we're going to have that Q&A and review session that I was mentioning, just to sort of have a break in the middle to make sure everyone is fully caught up with the material. And yeah, with that, we'll now describe the coding challenge and what it is.
Yeah, thanks, Rishika. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, so what is a coding challenge? These are the tests that are sent to the candidates by the company with the intent of screening technical skills of or coding proficiency. So no matter the level, experience, or the situation, every programmer has to take these challenges at every stage of their development. And why the coding challenge is because it helps the companies identify the best developers by looking at their work sample, allowing them to make a data-driven decision about whether the candidate should be on it's fit for on-site or not. We have in the upcoming slides, we also talk about the different like forms of coding challenges that you'll get. So the first one is skill building exercise. These are the coding problems you will come across on websites like LeetCode or HackerRank, and they are generally shorter than the interview style questions. Practicing these will build general skills in coding and improve your problem solving skills. The second type is take home interviews. These are technical challenges given by the employer that want to test your skills that are designed to be done in periods ranging from a few hours or a few days. You will have time to research and prepare for the problem after receiving the challenge. The third type is the live interview challenge, and these challenges are given in person or through an online medium that are designed to quickly assess your skills, knowledge, and problem solving abilities in real time. You will likely not have access to Google during these challenges, but you can get some assistance from the interviewer. With that, I'll pass it on to Rishika to talk about the approach to take a coding challenge.
All right, thank you. Let me just pull up. I think my slide stopped presenting for a second. All right, are you able to see them? Let me make them bigger. All right, so now I'm going to walk you through the different steps of how to approach a coding challenge. So first is to understand and analyze the problems. You want to read the question several times and understand it completely. Really think about the question and analyze it carefully. So definitely take your time to read through the problem statement all the way through, maybe a couple times. And what you want to do from there is maybe take a paper and write down everything that you think is important to actually solve this problem. So what is given, what is like what is the input, and then what do you actually need to find out, or what needs to be the output, what needs to be given to the user. So it doesn't matter if you've seen the question in the past or not, you still want to read the question several times because there might be, certain details that have been changed around. So you really want to make sure that you fully understand the problem. And you can also even ask the interviewer for, some follow-up questions just to clarify, because you want to make sure that you understand the ins and outs of the problem that's presented to you. And then while you're going through the problem, you actually want to ask a few questions to yourself. So did you understand the problem fully? If you didn't, then maybe this is a good way to try to figure out what you don't understand and clarify this with the person who's interviewing you. Next, would you be able to explain this question to someone else? So that's typically a pretty good test of if you actually fully understand it. Next is looking at the inputs and the outputs. So what and how many inputs are required? So what is that? What is the data type of the input? How many are required to be taken in to the problem statement? And then on the other side, what would be the output for those given inputs? So what is the expected output? And then that'll start to get you thinking of what you have to do to get from, sort of point A to point B. Next, would you need to separate out some modules or parts from the problem? So perhaps if you need to break down, if it's a really complicated problem statement, if you need to sort of break it down into multiple components and then sort of start from there. So instead of from point A to point B, maybe you need to break it down into 10 parts and then you sort of work out, part 1, part 2, part 3, and then that'll sort of make it a little bit easier to approach the challenge. And then also, do you have enough information to actually solve the question? And if you don't, then maybe you want to read the question again or clear it with the interviewer. So maybe something is missing, maybe when you don't understand the problem fully, maybe there are some details that are necessary to, start thinking about the solution. Maybe they're not quite there yet. So make sure to answer, have these questions in mind when you're sort of reading through the statement. Next is thinking about the sample input and output. So I already touched on this, but when you try to understand the problem, take some sample inputs and try to analyze the output. And then taking in some of these sample inputs will help you to understand the problem in a much better way. So you'll be able to get the clarity of how many cases your code can handle, what can be the possible outputs, or perhaps a range of outputs. Also, you want to consider some, just in general, some simple inputs or data and analyze the outputs. So maybe beyond the inputs that are provided to you, maybe think of, okay, maybe what if I had a different number or a different variable or something, like how would that be treated? And in doing this, you can actually start to consider the edge cases. So the edge cases are basically the situations where at first sight, when you have a simple solution, these edge cases are typically not taken account for. So it's definitely easier to sort of explain that when we're actually coding, but basically just think of this as things where a lot of times when you have a very simple solution to any coding challenge, these edge cases typically don't get accounted for, and that's what will lead to an error or might not give the proper output that you're expecting. And then you also want to consider, some maybe complex and bigger inputs and identify what will be their respective outputs for those. And then this will just start to get you thinking more and more about the problem and how many cases you actually need to take into account to solve the challenge. Next is breaking down the problem. So I did touch on this, but just to reiterate, so we want to break down the problem into smaller chunks or components and then try to solve each part of the problem. So one thing you can do is you can make a flow chart or a UML diagram for the problem in hand. And this, you might be able to only do these like a flow chart or a UML diagram if you have a whiteboarding interview or a take-home challenge, because if it's something that's where you're just like sharing your screen and coding and it's a more traditional sort of over the phone or over the computer interview, you won't really have the chance to do this, but you can definitely just like sort of sketch out a diagram on your own in a piece of paper, or just write out some things in plain English, something like that might also help you. So after you sort of divide up the problem into sub-problems or smaller chunks, then you can start to actually solve these sub-problems. And then you might want to actually make independent functions for each of these sub-problems. I'm not sure how familiar you are with functions, but basically functions allow you to sort of reuse different pieces of code. You can, when you break apart a more complex problem into smaller components, functions really allow you to leverage the power of actually dividing up the problem in that way. You can have functions refer to other functions and call other functions. And this allows you to essentially connect the solutions of all of these different sub-problems, and then you can call them in the required order. So this is only in the case if it's quite an advanced coding challenge, but just something to think about. And then wherever it's required, this is definitely optional and depends on the kind of question you're presented, but you can use classes and objects depending on the complexity. So this is something that's more like object-oriented programming. Again, that is a little bit more of an advanced concept, but we are going to be touching on that in later sessions. And then next we have pseudocode and actually replacing it with real code. So what you want to do is start with writing out some pseudocode and then actually reading. And what pseudocode is, it actually helps to define the structure of your code. And it'll actually help you to write every single line of code that you need in order to solve the problem. So reading pseudocode gives you a really clear idea of what your code is supposed to do. And once you've written the pseudocode, then it's actually time to translate it into real code or into actual code. In this case, it would be Python. And so what you want to do is replace each line of your pseudocode into real code. It's not necessarily that one line of pseudocode translates to one line of real code. Sometimes it's one line of pseudocode to an entire function or to multiple lines of code. But basically you want to just go through every single line and see how that translates to code. In this case, it would be something like Python. And if you had already divided your problem into subproblems, then you would write down the code for every subproblem. So you look at the pseudocode for all of your subproblems and then translate it to Python. So here's a simple example of kind of what pseudocode and actual Python code look like. So here we have, say we're looking at trying to assign letter grades depending on maybe like an exam's numerical score. So if the score is 90 or above, grade is an A. So here they're using if and else. And And so what they're doing is basically with different conditions, you want to assign a different letter grade depending upon the numerical score of the exam. So if the score is 90 or above, grade is an A. So this is how it translates to Python. So we have our if statement here. Score is basically some variable we're assuming that has been declared, and then we're using this comparison operator, greater than or equal to, and then the number 90, and then grade is another variable that we've declared, and we're setting that equal to A. So this is basically just a character that we're setting it equal to. And then we have that condition for all of them where we have else, and then A, 80, and then B, and then 70, and then C. And then we have a closing else statement here where grade is F. So you basically just go through every line of code and see kind of how it translates to Python. And this is definitely a very important step because you don't want to get right to coding. That's something that typically will lead you to the wrong solution, or maybe a solution that's not accounting for all the different possible inputs and edge cases that I mentioned. So pseudocode is definitely a really important step that you want to include when you're approaching any coding challenge. And then the last step is optimize and simplify. So you also want to improve your code. So typically the first solution that you present to your interviewer, they're not gonna say, okay, this is good, and then the interview is done. That generally does not happen. What will happen is interviewer will ask you, how can your code be better? How can it be faster? Can you use a different data structure that might be more optimal? So there's always a way to improve your code. So you want to look back, you want to analyze it once again, try to find a better or another solution to it. And as I mentioned, writing down the correct solution to your problem is not the final thing that you should do, because typically like the first solution that you have is never the one that you're going to finish the interview with. So you want to explore the problem completely with all the different possible solutions, and then write down the most efficient or optimized solution. And it's really important when you're going through this process to be very vocal with your interviewer. So as you're going through this thought process, thinking of, oh, maybe I can optimize it in this way so that it'll run a little bit faster, or maybe I can, instead of 20 if and else statements, maybe there's a better way to do that. So there's a lot of different ways you can optimize code, but just making sure that you're thinking about how to optimize your code and how to simplify it.
Let's go over some do's and don'ts in technical interviews. Do's. So it's always good to have questions ready for your interviewer, like how's the work culture, or what's your favorite part of working here? I mean, it's good if you have something prepared, because you don't want to end your interview with like, I don't have any questions. And the second point is you can have some practice sessions with your friends or family and get some feedback from them. The more you practice, the more confident you are. Research about the company beforehand, because it's always good to stay up to date. And think out loud and ask questions when solving a problem or answering a question. This way the interviewer will know what your thought process is. Let's move on to the don'ts, which is important. So first is, don't ignore time considerations. So if you're in a time crunch, strategically split your time to solve all the questions. You don't want to waste your time to just solve one problem. Don't feel disheartened if you could not go to the next round. Don't let one bad interview get you down. Not only the interviewers and interviews vary in difficulty and challenge, but so the interviewers and who is interviewing here. Avoid making assumption about the kinds of questions that can be asked. Don't get too stuck on a solution. Be open to hearing different ways to solve the problem. Like Rishika mentioned, you will have optimal way to solve some questions. There will be some solution that you can have a better time or space complexity. So be open to that. Don't use Google while interviewing. They can hear you typing, and also you would not be able to read the solution under such stress. So the important part here is understand the logic rather than worrying about the syntax. Don't be late. It's very important to be on time. That shows your interview how you are, like a punctual person or not. And the last point is don't be dishonest about your resume and previous experiences, because you don't want to be put on a spot to talk about something in your resume that you do have no idea about. So keep these points in mind. Let's get on to the next slide. Yeah, so all these, the resources listed out in the next page. They provide you with various challenges in different domains. So you can start out with any of these. There's Lead Code out there, HackerRank, Code Wars, Code Chef. So you can just click on these links and create your account and start practicing. They do have divided the problems into easy, medium, and hard. So based on your level, you can choose to solve problems accordingly to that. I'm going to pause here for some Q&A, and then we will see Rishika code and what's her approach to solving a coding problem.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the Q&A box. I do see a question about what's your opinion of using TDD, for example, PyTest for interview problems. I'm not too familiar with what TDD stands for. I'm not sure if it's something where it'll sort of run like a test on your code to basically test for different edge cases and different inputs, but I'm not too sure. Jasmeen, do you know?
Yeah, so I would say it depends, because if it's like a live interview and you have like 30 minutes to solve like 5 problems, I wouldn't go for writing PyTest. PyTest is good when you're like doing some organizational code and you have unit testing integrated in your code base. But again, it depends. If you have a take-home interview, maybe yes, I would do it, but not during like a live session. But yeah, I mean, we use in our organization, we integrate PyTest. So obviously that's an important part for unit testing.
All right. And then I see a question, how do you normally find or approach edge cases when under stress? That's a really good question. I definitely have missed out on edge cases when I've been in a technical interview. But I think what helps is that thinking of the simplest cases first and just making sure that your code definitely accounts for those. And then I think for me, what works really well is sort of talking through my solution. And as you're talking through it, and your interviewer will sometimes give you feedback and ask you follow-up questions, depends on, you know, the interaction with the interviewer, but sometimes I'll ask you a follow-up question like, oh, does it account for this? And sometimes they will help you through it. Like they're not, you know, completely, you know, silent and not helping you in any way. And so as you're talking through it out loud, you might be able to actually catch some edge cases as you're walking through it in that sense. And I've definitely have, you know, had that experience where I'm like, oh, wait, so if I have this code written out like this, if I have an input of 10, then it actually is not being accounted for and it's going to give me the wrong output. So that's what works well for me, because I think for me under stress, I definitely get pretty talkative, but sometimes I try to use that to my advantage by just sort of, you know, figuring out in that sense. That's what works for me. Jasmeen, if you have anything to add to that.
I think you covered it all. I a lot of times.
Okay, and then I see another question, what to do when brain fried, how to come up with a solution of a question that and steps they've never seen. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of things you can do in a like for when it comes to interview prep that can really help to decrease your stress levels and to make sure that even when it's a completely new coding challenge, just making sure that you're not letting the stress get to you so you can think as clearly as possible. So one of that is basically just doing as many practice questions as possible, and perhaps even doing those practice questions in like a timed setting. So it's you're kind of replicating what an interview is like. You can also do mock interviews. There's tons of resources out there where you can sign up for free mock interviews. I think there's different communities that offer mock interviews like that, where you can sort of work, and you can also, you know, have like a a friend or a peer of yours who you can both sort of interview each other, and you're just, I think like practice really helps with that. And so I think that's kind of, when you're getting closer to the interview, sort of being in those timed sort of more pressure settings, that definitely helps. But before that, making sure that you're really like nailing down the fundamentals, the data structures, the algorithms. So something like this, where we're going over all the different data structures, this will definitely help you to make sure that you know the ins and outs of what you would have to actually like use as your tools to answer these questions. So yeah, just by being here and trying to be part of this series, that's already a really great first step. So I see a question: what happens if I went down the rabbit hole with the wrong approach for 35 of the 45-minute interview time? What do you advise to turn this around to a good interview? Yeah, so I have also been in this situation, probably more than I wanted to, and it does happen. First thing is, don't let it get to you. Like, don't let this bring you down, because you still have 15 minutes left, and there's a lot you can do with those 15 minutes. So it's great that you can realize that you went down with the wrong approach, whether it's wrong in the sense that maybe you could be doing it in a better way, or maybe you understood the question incorrectly. And so if you understood the question incorrectly, maybe just having a conversation with your interviewer and making sure that you really know what is happening. And if you, in 15 minutes, it might be hard to get like a fully fledged out, solution in code. But instead, you can maybe just start to write out some pseudocode. Maybe you can start to just think out and just make sure you have the logic down, and make sure you sort of address that to your interviewer that, yes, I am starting to understand this and I understand the logic of it. Maybe I don't have enough time to actually write it down in Python, but at least I can explain to you my thought process and how I would approach it. And that'll show that at least you have the sort of the logic to actually answer this question. And then just do your best. I mean, not every interview is going to go perfectly. I've definitely realized that from my experiences. And as we said, don't let one bad round beat you down, and just keep your motivation going.
Yeah, I to that. I mean, when you read a question, start with thinking about it, like Rishika mentioned in her slides, and also keep on talking to your interviewer as soon as you start a question. Like keep him on track while solving it, so that he knows that if you're going in a wrong direction, he's there to correct you. Yeah, and I mean, if you keep on talking to him and whatever you're thinking, you're being allowed, I think he'll bring you on track if you're going off track. Yeah.
Okay, and then what should we do in between the sessions that we're hosting to prepare for the next session? So we do have sort of the next topic already laid out for you, the arrays and matrices, not arrays and matrices, the Python specific built-in data structures. So our plan is that in between sessions, we aim to sort of release a technical interview question to sort of take home with you, and then you can work on it. And hopefully you can engage with other participants of the series over the Slack channel, which we'll get to at the end, where you can discuss your own solution, or kind of like your thought process of how you would approach this problem. And then a couple or a few days before the next session, we'll actually sort of release the solution, and then this will kind of make sure that you're keeping the preparation going. So for today, we won't be necessarily sending home a technical interview question with you. We do have a medium and a hard level question that we're going to present with a problem statement. So what you can do is start to think about that, maybe not fully coding it in Python, but starting to think about what data structure would I use, how would I write out the pseudocode for this, and that's kind of something that you can start to do. Okay, I think so. Another question: using Google for coding challenge interviews, not live with the person. So I'm guessing that's like if it's like a take-home challenge. I think it's okay to use Google in terms of if you need to look up the syntax for Python or something like that, or if you just need to brush up on a certain data structure, typically you're given anywhere from like a few days to a week to solve the take-home challenge, and they know that it's take-home, so they're not really restricting what resources you can use. But I also don't think you should just find the solution online and copy it and send it in, because this is an opportunity for you to really practice and apply your knowledge. So making sure you can still leverage the resources that Google provides to you, but really taking the opportunity to code a solution and making sure that you can really own the code that you're writing. And then Jasmeen, do you want to take the last question? And then I think we'll go back to the presentation.
Start the presentation. I can type this answer.
Okay. All right. So we're going to get into some sample interview questions. So we're going to be using this thing called Replit, which allows you to sort of have this like shared online coding platform. So here's a link to actually join this. But first I'm going to explain the problem statement. So this is called FizzBuzz, which is, maybe some of you have heard it. It's a pretty classic sort of initial interview question that you might get. And this is typically for like a live interview. So what you want to do is write a Python program which iterates the integers from 1 to 50. For multiples of 3, you want to print out the word fizz instead of the number. And then for multiples of 5, you want to print out buzz in place of the number. For numbers which are multiples of both 3 and 5, you want to print out fizz buzz. And then if it doesn't satisfy any of those conditions, you just want to print out the number itself. So if you click on this link here, it's basically going to take you to the Replit that we have. And this is right now just a blank file. And what you want to do is actually, if you don't have a Replit account, you want to first create an account. So when you open this, it might prompt you to create an account. And I think you can sort of create an account using an existing Google account. That's a pretty simple way to do that. And then just like with GitHub, you can actually fork different files. So you actually want to fork this file because this is kind of like a file that everyone is on right now, but you kind of want to have your own version of it. So if you go, let me see. Yeah, so if you go, if you're right here, if you want to click up here and then click fork, then you want to fork it so that you have it your own version of it, and so it's in your own sort of repository, essentially just like how we have on GitHub. So I'll give everyone maybe just like a minute or two to create an account if you don't have one, and then, or maybe just a minute, because I want to make sure we can get to the solution for this. But yeah, let me know if everyone is having any issues with the link to Replit or creating an account or forking, anything like that. But we'll get started in just a minute. And yeah, make sure we don't want to type out anything directly on this file, because this is sort of the file shared with everyone. So to fork it, what you're going to do is click up here, and then you want to click fork. So yeah, that's all you need to do. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat regarding this, so I'm going to get started. So just a reminder, we want to iterate from the integers 1 to 50, and then for multiples of 3, print fizz. For multiples of 5, print buzz. And then for numbers that are multiples of both, you want to print fizz buzz. So we're actually going to be using a for loop to begin with. So what you want to do is type out for, and then we're just going to be using for fizz buzz. And so you can kind of make this anything. You can make this for I, for X, for F, anything you want. But I'm actually going to be using the in keyword, and then I'm going to be using a range. And what range allows you to do is basically go through like a range of different numbers. So what we're going to be doing here is actually doing a range 51. Since you want to go from the integers of 1 to 50, if we just have for fizzbuzz in range 51, because what range does here is actually going to take basically whatever's inside there, 51, subtracted by 1, it's going to go until then. So we're going to be going from 1 to 50. And then to end this first line, we need a colon and then click enter. And let me make sure no one has any questions. Okay, so how to fork this? What you need to do is click up here and then click fork. Yeah. Okay, so getting back into this for loop. So now that we have the first line, we actually have to make the for loop do something. So what we're going to do is first do if fizzbuzz, oh, let me spell that right, fizzbuzz, since we have it's the same thing right up here. So if fizzbuzz, and then we're going to be using something called the modulo, which is, or modulus, which basically is sort of taking the remainder when you're dividing by a number. So we're going to say 3. So essentially, we're going to say if fizzbuzz is some number, like the number 3, and then if you divide it by 3, what is the remainder? That's going to be 0. So if it's a multiple of 3, when you divide it by 3, the remainder will be 0. So that's why we're using this. And then we're going to say a double equal sign, because whenever we have an if statement, we want to use a double equal sign because that's basically a Boolean value. So it's going to evaluate either to true or false. So in this case, if fizzbuzz modulus 3 equals 0, that means that if we're dividing some number by 3 and the remainder is 0, then we're going to do something. And then we're going to check for another condition because we also have numbers that are, so this is a condition for checking for both 3 and 5. So this is what I'm typing out right now. Then we're going to do and fizzbuzz. And then again, we're going to do the modulus. And then we're going to do 5 because we're testing out the other condition. And again, we're doing 0. So now this is a case where if this number is divisible by 3 without any remainder and also divisible by 5 without any remainder, then we're going to do something. And what we want to do is print out fizzbuzz. So an example of a number like this is like 15, because 15 divided by 3 is 5, 15 divided by 5 is 3. And then what we want to do in here is print out fizzbuzz, because that's what we want to have printed out. All right, so we have one condition taken care of. And then we're going to be using this continue keyword. And what this keyword essentially does is that it makes sure that we sort of continue going on inside this for loop and to our next condition. And we're going to have an elif statement. So basically just, we're going to sort of be having this if elif sort of structure to our for loop. So we'll have another condition to check for. And we're going to be checking for is this first condition where for multiples of 3, print out fizz. So we're going to say elif fizzbuzz modulus 3. So we're only checking for 3. So all we have to do is just have that. So basically just the first part of our first if statement. And then in this case, we want to print out fizz, basically what we have up here. And now we can say continue again and make sure your indents and everything are fine. You want to make sure that this if and elif are lined up. And you want to make sure that it's sort of indented once from the for loop. And then our last statement is going to be elif fizzbuzz. And now we're going to be checking for if it's a multiple of 5. And basically this part of our first or of our second line of code. And then we print out buzz. And then we continue. And now in the case that now if it doesn't satisfy any of these, meaning that it's not a multiple of 3, it's not a multiple of 5, and it's not a multiple of both 3 and 5, then we simply just print out the number itself. So that's a solution to this problem statement in Python. So this is typically considered an easy level problem. If this is something that is really new to you, and for loops and if and print statements, all of that, even using something like modulus, that's completely fine. I would highly suggest sort of walking through this code a little bit more, making sure you understand the ins and outs of it. And this is kind of the solution that I came up with. Sometimes it might say, iterate the integers from 1 to n. So instead of providing an actual number inside here, you simply just say for fizzbuzz and range n, And then depending on what that end value is, it's going to change how it runs. But this is a solution that I have. So hopefully everyone was able to follow along. Hopefully you can fork the file and get this working. Yeah, I think that's it for demonstrating this solution. So what we have next is
yeah, we won't be going through this now, but it's just an example of how a medium question can look like. These are from lead code, and the question is like, given a string S, return the longest palindrome substring in S. So the input string is CBVT and the output is PV. Again, we will send you all the take-home interview questions that we planned for each sessions, but this is just an example of how it can look like. And then we have another hard question, I guess. Yeah, this is like longest valid parentheses. So given a string containing just the characters, find the length of the longest valid well-formed parentheses substring. But yeah, you all will get a lot of practice in the upcoming sessions, and we'll walk through each questions for each data structure. So that's exciting.
Yeah, so that concludes all the material we had prepared for the first session. The next session will be 2 weeks from today, so same day, same time, Thursday, March 11th at 8 p.m. EST. That'll be session number 2. We'll be focusing on Python specific and built-in data structures, so tuples, dictionaries, sets, and lists. In the meantime, feel free to go back and review the FizzBuzz problem and the solution that I provided, as well as the medium and hard level questions. Start to think about it. And yeah, we hope you can join us for the second session. And if anyone has any more questions, feel free to drop it in the Q&A box. We do have a Slack channel dedicated to this series. So it's Intro Data Structure Study Group, typed out just like that. So once you've joined our Slack community, when you go into the different channels, you can click Browse Channels, and you should be able to search for this, and you can join it pretty easily. And so in there, we'll be posting different things. Like one thing I mentioned, where in between sessions, we'll be we'll sort of send you home with a couple questions to work on, technical interview questions, and then you can discuss the solution with other people that are also in the channel. And then we'll be dropping the solution to that a couple days before the following session. Let's see if So I see a question about why was FizzBuzz printed out at the end as well? You already printed it earlier. So in this case, when I was printing out FizzBuzz, it was actually not FizzBuzz in like a pair of quotes. So what I was doing earlier was printing out FizzBuzz as like a string for when the number was divisible by both 5 and 3. But in this case, I'm actually printing out FizzBuzz, the number itself. So that's the condition where any number from 1 to 50 is not divisible by 5 and or 3. So a number like 1, you can't divide that by 3 and 5 without having some sort of remainder to it. So in that case, you'd print out the number itself. All right. And then I see a question about where can you find the problem? So if you just go back a couple slides, you can see here, this is a link to the Replit. So, and the problem statement is also laid out right here. Currently, I do have the full solution typed out in this link. So all you have to do is click this link. And if you don't already have an account for this platform, you have to first create the account, then fork it so you have your own version. And then you'll be able to go from there. All right, so I see a question. There's a couple of questions about if you can continue with the iteration without writing continue. I believe you can. I chose to include continue because continue basically helps so that whatever current iteration that you are of the for loop, just so that it keeps going. On the flip side, you also have break, where if it reaches a certain condition, it'll actually break out of the for loop and stop the for loop from running, or it doesn't have to be a for loop, could also be a while loop. So you can have the code without continue statements in between if and elif. I just chose to do that because it sort of is like another like safety measure to make sure that your code continues to run. But all you can do is simply remove the continue statements that I had on those different lines, and the code should still run with the expected output. Hopefully that answers the question about continue. Yeah, I'll give another maybe like 30 seconds for a few more questions, if any more questions that come in. But yeah, please join our Slack community and our Slack channel for this series. And thank you everyone for joining. I hope you all will continue on for our future sessions. This was just our introduction session, so it wasn't as technical, but starting our next session in 2 weeks, we'll be getting into definitely more technical concepts and a bit more of coding. All right, I don't see any more questions, so I think that's it for today. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, afternoon, evening, wherever you're joining in from. And I hope to see you in 2 weeks.